Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michael O'Brien. I'm the President of Client Experience at Ketchum. And it goes without saying that the upcoming U.S. presidential election is possibly the most divisive of our lifetime. Beyond party platforms and candidate rhetoric, the uncertainty around the election itself poses potential reputational risks or brand risks and implications for how to engage with your stakeholders. How do brands develop strategies to navigate this election cycle and make good decisions in real time is what we're going to be talking about today. To that end, we've assembled a panel of Ketchum experts in media, reputation management, issues in crisis management, employee engagement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm pleased to be joined by Bill Zucker, Managing Director, Ketchum Advisory and Media Services, Lauren Butler, Senior Vice President of Ketchum Employee Communications and Engagement, and Lindsay Wagner, Senior Vice President and North American Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. First, a few housekeeping notes. We're going to be sending out a PDF which will encapsulate what we're talking about today after the session. And then there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If you want to put questions in the Q&A box, we're going to do a brief Q&A at the end. So my first question is for Bill. And Bill, this election cycle is well underway, and we've been sort of dealing with the back and forth, the polarization for months and months now. What is some advice you would give our participants who are thinking about how to manage the media cycle for the next few weeks and maybe even a little bit beyond November 3rd?
Thanks, Michael. And please, if you see a fly on my hair, let me know. I think fluid is the word for people managing a media cycle. When you think about these last 3.5 weeks between now and the election, and I know we'll talk later about what might happen after the election, but in these 3.5 weeks, I think when you think of external posture, choose your lane, stick to it, be fluid with media, and monitor and prepare on issues. And if you can do that, I think you can get through these next 3.5 weeks. When I say choose your lane, it's about the posture that you're going to take as a brand or as an executive, and it needs to obviously fit very closely with who you are as a company, what your purpose is, and as Lauren will talk about in just a bit, a lot of that is, for many companies, is about a posture around civic engagement. For some companies, it's about advocating for issues that are important to them as a company. That comes up with immigration and tariffs and things like that. For a very rare number of companies and CEOs, it might be actual partisan advocacy, but that's something you would only really do if you truly have stakeholder permission for it. And for some companies, it's do nothing. And each has their rationale for those lanes, but pick that lane and stick to it. And then as you go through these last 3.5 weeks, if you haven't already done it, you should have a scenario grid together that will tell you, based on the kinds of things that we know will happen in the next 3.5 weeks, what will we do, and then do it quickly. You're not going to have a lot of time to think about it, to react. As some companies know, very quickly their name can be mentioned in the news. It was happening to a lot of pharma companies over the last week, happened again yesterday. And you need to basically have the 15 to 30 minute turnaround time on if we're going to deal with that and how we're going to deal with that. Now, when it comes to media relations, obviously there's a very high bar right now for companies that are trying to become a part of the media. Equally, it's important for executives who have to be a part of the media to truly be prepared for election-related questions, and so that preparation is certainly a part of it. When you think about what's going on in the media right now, I think about 2 days this week. Monday, the network evening news wiped out because it was those 30 minutes that the president was flying from the hospital back to the White House. All those news windows went away. Then I think about Wednesday morning. Just 2 days later, Good Morning America, this was a client of ours, Clorox, was actually on Good Morning America because they had a story very relevant to what's going on in the news right now, the pandemic, and it was specific to something that they've created to help schools figure out whether there's illness in the classroom. So, you pick the right day and the right story that really matches the news cycle, there's a lot of room for it. The last quick point I'll make about media is as difficult as it is right now, the news media is also doing us a lot of favors because not only are they more willing to take what I'll call handout material because they're very busy gathering the news that they can during a pandemic that's not easy, but as all of us know, we're doing more and more interviews without our executives having to leave their home or their office, which certainly gives opportunities in an otherwise difficult environment.
Right. Thanks, Bill. Hey, Lindsay, the headline of the moment has been so unpredictable over the last year or so, but the one consistent thread has been issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Give me a sense for how you think the state of play should work over the next several weeks.
Well, thank you, Michael. What's really important, I think, is, oftentimes politics really plays into our fears on both sides of the equation. And so what we need to remember, if we're talking about internal culture specifically, is how important it is that we remember what aligns us in getting back to our humanity and what our core values are, not only as a brand, but as people within an organization. And that's where we're really going to start to find some of those similarities. So no matter how divisive it might seem, no matter how different we might feel that we are, inherently at our core, we are truly connected by a certain set of values as people. And really building some of those safe containers now is incredibly important if you haven't been doing that yet, because post-election, you're going to have different reactions from different groups of people at your company, internal, external stakeholders, and it's really important that you're starting to have those conversations where folks can really align on their similarities to really help with whatever the outcome is going to be from the election. As it pertains to still engaging with media and really what that looks like, going back to the basics, such as knowing your audience and really knowing what does your audience expect from you about these topics, to take a stand, is it a position on candidates or key issues, and really what lines up with your core values, knowing that being neutral could actually cause some divisions on either side, either externally or internally with your people, so it's important that you know that. Making sure that you also realize that you probably should wait on any big announcements with your day-to-day media unless it directly relates to some of the topics that are pretty hot right now as it pertains to politics and what's going on in the U.S. And so you might have to take a little bit of a backseat and really evaluate what you're going to your media friends with. Another thing we know that is going to be at the forefront for quite some time during the election is going to be things about gender and race. And taking, Biden choosing Kamala Harris, for instance, that's going to keep those topics front and center. So making sure that you familiarize, if you haven't yet, with what a lot of those key issues and topics will be is going to be incredibly important as you ladder back to how you're going to be communicating around this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So let's turn for a moment to inside our organizations. Lauren, you're an expert in employee engagement, and you tout the need for companies to think inside out and really view their employees as not only a key stakeholder, but maybe the biggest influence on external perceptions of the company. So I'd love your perspective on how companies should think about the upcoming election in the workplace and understanding how to continue to build culture and cultural equity over time during this sort of divisive period.
Employees are, I was saying that in 2020, companies are taking more of a risk if they do not support enable voter participation and celebrate Election Day among employees. Employees are the #1 stakeholder in a company's organization, and 2020 is really a year where we've seen employee priorities and the drivers of employee engagement shift significantly. In our recent Ketchum WorkShift 2020 study, we surveyed 3,000 Americans, and nearly half of the respondents said that corporate values and flexibility in the workplace are more important to them now than compensation or career advancement. And so having a civic engagement program that is proactively supporting and enabling an employee's ability to vote, to promote democracy, it supports corporate values and increases employee morale. So it's really critical that companies play a critical role in making it easier for employees to vote as well. In 2016, only 58% of voter-eligible population actually voted, and the numbers have been similar in 2012 and 2008. And we have to do better, and companies need to help in enabling employees to have the opportunity to go out and vote. And you know, like if anyone saw Chris Rock on Saturday Night Live last Saturday, he made the point that you know, we're talking about election day falls on a Tuesday in November. He said weddings don't happen on a Tuesday in November. Churches don't happen, you know, go to church on a Tuesday in November. And Saturday Night Live, can you imagine if that was Tuesday Night Live? It would have been canceled in 1975. So I think that, you know, that really underscores this critical role that companies need to play to make voting easier for their employees. And, you know, through the registration drives that a lot of companies have been doing, voting guides, resources to educate on the federal, state, and local levels, you know, voting turnout campaigns, and the importance of providing flexibility to vote.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for that perspective. Lindsay, we were talking a moment ago about the role that DE&I has played in the election cycle. Well, let's assume for a moment that the companies that are representing on this call are looking to nurture a diverse and inclusive workplace. What are those companies going to have to think about, not just the next 3 weeks, but in game planning for the aftermath of the election?
Yeah, so touching a little bit about what I was saying a few minutes ago, you know, there's going to be different reactions from different communities within your organization. But again, remembering that at our core, we have far more similarities than we do differences. So really take a step back, and I would recommend that you evaluate if you have a safe enough container, if you've had enough safe containers thus far to have those courageous conversations. And really, what does that look like? Are you holding space for people? Do people at your organization feel seen? At this current time, if you've put a stake in the ground about being a company that truly supports diversity, equity, inclusion, now is the time to double down and reiterate to your employees and your team that you 100% are doubling down in this situation, and that all voices are welcomed, valued, and respected at your organization, and that people can, in fact, bring their whole selves to work. But really, what does that mean that they need from you? And those are some of the questions that you'll want to ask in some of these safe space containers that hopefully you've built up until this point, either leaning into your diversity, equity, inclusion leaders or folks around your organization that have been tasked with doing this and making sure that it's also part of everyone's job. And that part of that really means people need to feel seen at your organization. So how do you see people? Most of the time, people definitely want to be given the permission to feel. So you really need to make sure that you're listening, you're holding space with an empathetic ear, you're looking at the entire spectrum of their feelings. This is a new concept for a lot of companies and a lot of people to be able to feel at work. But gone are the days where we're just coming to work and we're not having any sort of feelings on either side of the coin of the equation. So it's really important that you focus on that and allow people to have space to do that within your organization. You can also tactically do that by holding listening sessions with your D&I groups, with your councils, your employee resource groups, anything that you might have where you can really gain some insights and learn from them what it is, how they're actually feeling, what the community is sensing and feeling within the organization, and where they would like to be feeling if it's maybe not necessarily in a great place, or perhaps some folks aren't speaking up or saying anything because they don't feel welcomed, or they're not part of the popular majority at the company, so they don't know that there's really space for them anywhere. So what's really important is no matter how this election turns out, you're going to have a group of people that might be nervous about showing a certain emotion or feeling, or you're actually going to possibly have some folks that might even feel unheard or unsafe, depending on how things really shift out. So really, really important that you make sure that you're building those containers now and starting to have some of those conversations to get to a place where people can really feel comfortable to share with you what's truly going on inside the organization.
Right. That's excellent advice, Lindsay. Thank you. Bill, I want to circle back to you. Anyone who says they know what's going to happen on November 3rd is guessing. They have no idea. We have no idea. So how do you think about, from a reputation standpoint, if you're trying to build a brand standpoint, how do you think about preparing for what is clearly an unknown?
Yeah, I mean, there's really three different things that could happen, say, within a couple of days after the election. It's possible that, we will know that there's a winner. So it's possible within a few days there will be enough votes and enough evidence to say Vice President Biden's the winner or President Trump's been reelected. And so those are two scenarios to prepare for. But obviously the other scenario is that there's no clear winner and that we could go on for days or weeks or even months not certain about where things are headed. For that last scenario, I would urge companies and brands to really think about being cautious in your preparations for November and December. I think it's going to feel a little bit like a combination between how things felt after the 2000 election, where there was doubt, and even how things felt back in March and April when we were first hitting the pandemic. There's a lot of, I don't know exactly what to say. Is it okay for my brand to be out there talking? And I think those are things you need to talk about now because it is such a realistic scenario. We didn't know the pandemic was coming, and we had to deal with that and decide when it was acceptable to talk again and when was too soon. We do have the opportunity to think about that now. So scenario planning for that now is really important. If, on the other hand, we do have a declared winner fairly soon, we ought to be prepared as companies and brands to know our place in speaking about how we will work with that next administration. Most companies have a very specific set of issues that will either be challenged or will be opportunities once we know who the next administration will be and to an extent who the next Senate will be. Just know that you need a backup plan, you need to be fluid. It's possible that those are going to be very dark months depending on the outcome.
Right. Bill, we had a question in the chat box that asked if you represent a European brand, does that change the dynamic a little bit if you're thinking about when to make an announcement, or if you want to communicate something big within the next month time frame?
Well, if you're a European brand looking to make an announcement in the United States, I would say be very cautious. Look, sometimes we have to make an announcement that, it's time sensitive, we need to do it. And so if that's the case, I would find ways to do that ensure we won't be butting against a potential tone of a day, right? I mean, you could have an announcement that's the same day that we actually finally figure out who the winner is. That could be really difficult. And so making sure that first, that you're not entirely reliant on earned media if the announcement would not do well against, say, a surprise election result on that day is certainly really important. And then considering the tone. If you have flexibility, I would say stay flexible. Don't pick a final date until we see how things shake out.
Right. That's good advice. Thank you. The way I wanted to sort of wrap this up is just talk a little bit about some what I would describe as actionable insights, things that our listeners and viewers can apply in the next couple of weeks. And I'll kick it off with one that I was thinking about. If you had an election between authenticity and opportunism as a communication strategist, authenticity needs to win over the next month. It's a moment to really root communication in your company values, your brand purpose. Go back to the things that are the foundational pieces of how you think about communications and make that the basis for how you're making decisions. So that would be my first sort of overall takeaway. Lauren, do you want to talk about it from an employee perspective?
Sure, and you're absolutely right. And authenticity is as of all times of utmost importance. And I think back to the comment about company values being more important than ever. I think that this is a perfect time to display those through civic engagement. And some companies like our parent company, Omnicom, are giving employees a day off to encourage voting, to do volunteerism. And even if companies can't give the day off, there are other ways to provide flexibility, like a day of no meetings, partial day off, and flex time. So, there's things that can be done in the next few weeks that you can help really help people be authentic in their and have a voice. And everyone is equal when we vote, and everyone has that moment for authenticity. So I think encouraging that among employees is really important.
Lindsay, what would be your sort of one takeaway?
Sure. I feel like I, at this point, need to make a shirt that says cultivate safe spaces, because I'm going to keep saying it over and over and over again. It's incredibly important that you cultivate safe spaces now, if you haven't been already, and really working on those courageous conversations with your people. Know that when you do cultivate those safe spaces, it's not your job to save the people that are sharing their feelings, or in general, it's not your job to be a savior, but it's your job to hold space, allow people to get it out, allow them to talk through what it is that they require from you, what it is they require from their colleagues, from themselves, from their community, so you can move beyond where we are presently to where we want to be. And what's also really important is that you make sure that your language around anything that you are doing right now around the election and the voting process is incredibly inclusive. Remember that you might have some people at your organization that can't vote. So how are you going to make sure that they also feel included in the process? So there's plenty of ways to highlight how they can stay involved and engaged even if they aren't able to vote. So it's, yes, voting is a huge part of the conversation, but also how are you getting people engaged now in different ways, and also after the election. We don't want to just be talking about this in November of this year because we have a big election.
Great advice, Lindsay, and I'll take one of those T-shirts in a large, please. Thank you. Bill, one more summation idea.
I'm going to squeeze in two quick thoughts. The first is have a war room mentality between now and December. Even if you're not a crisis communicator, as most of our guests today are not, have a daily meeting, get the team together, do some gut checks as you see what the tone is of the day, what's going on, and decide, is whatever we had planned for today still useful? Does it still match? Essentially read the room together and decide how you're going to pivot based on what could be some pretty fast-moving things. And the other thing I'll say is you mentioned authenticity, Michael, and I think a cousin of authenticity is credibility. And so I would say credibility wins in incredible times. I wrote a blog post on Monday that I'd love for you to read with my reactions to the press conference at Walter Reed Hospital over the weekend, where the credibility of doctors started to be questioned because of spinning. And it was just a great reminder to me that when we try to spin things, when we try to get cute, we lose credibility. It's really hard to gain that back. So what is credible for your executive, for your brand, for your company? If you're not sure that that can come out in a media interaction, make sure that you're getting them through training so that they can get there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bill. I'll sum it up this session by saying simply that this year has been among the most challenging on so many levels, but has really stretched the capabilities of communications organizations around the country and around the world. It's very hard to find the crystalline, perfect answer to the challenges that we face every day. This is a perfect time to invoke the 80-20 rule, which is just get there as best you can. And more uncertainty looms as the election process proceeds over the next couple of weeks. So as the election approaches, and businesses should take a moment and pause and reflect and think about, how can we election-proof our communications? How can we make sure that our communications are aligned with who we believe we are and who we want to be after the election, as much as what we want to be for the next 3 weeks? So for clients on the call, if you'd like to follow up for counsel in any of these areas, or speak to your client director, or set up a call with any of our specialty experts. And if you're not a Ketchum client, you can email us at newbusiness@ketchum.com, and we can connect there. So good luck to all of you over the next couple of weeks. It's going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride, but I'm certain that if we apply these best practices, you'll get through it in the best way possible. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.